The reunification of Germany was not supposed to happen. The world had seen what a united Germany could do. It had been in the heart of the conflict in two world wars. So, how did Germany reunite? A united Germany was a strong Germany. The main reason it was partitioned in the first place was this guy who stole Charlie Chaplin's look. You know who I'm talking about. But before we talk about partition, we must know some backstory. So, how was Germany able to fight and win against the Allies at the start of the war? Germany had a large deposit of iron and coal, which powered their industries. Coupled with the invincible Luftwaffe, Hitler and this Prussian general, whom nobody seems to care about for some reason, by the name of Erich von Manstein. This was while France was facing a brain drain in all areas, including military command. Germany had the best generals. The French had also built a series of forts and fortified positions called the Maginot Line on the German-French border that was impenetrable. This gave the French generals a sense of overconfidence. And of course, who can forget Neville Chamberlain, the greatest Prime Minister of Great Britain? So, if Hitler was able to do the impossible, that is, take over almost all of the European mainland and almost defeat Russia, something even Napoleon couldn't do, why did he lose?
A chronic lack of resources and paranoia. One of the reasons he attacked the USSR and Egypt was to gain the resources needed to run the German war machine.
At the end of the war, a German tank battalion had around a tenth of what they started the war with, and the small arms situation wasn't that far off. The way Germany's science and war doctrine progressed was in favor of larger, more resource consuming weaponry, while the Allies focused on mass production. Also, at the start of the war, Hitler's generals ran the army. Hitler felt power slipping away from him, so he reduced the autonomy of his generals and tried to regain his power. This, however, led to some bad decisions in Egypt and Russia, which eventually culminated in declaring war on the USA, which, believe me, was a bad idea. There are also huge drawbacks to conquering places, and that is resistance. The French, Polish, and Czechoslovakian resistance also put a heavy toll on Germany's resources. After the war, Germany was split into seven parts. The British controlled Germany, French controlled Germany, US controlled Germany, the Tsar Protectorate, USSR controlled Germany, Germany that was annexed by Russia, and Germany annexed by Poland. The western side, that was occupied by USA and its allies, became the Federal Republic of Germany, while the portion occupied by the USSR became the German Democratic Republic. Wait, before we get into the thick of it, why do we call it the reunification and not the unification? Why add that extra RE so that people like me keep messing it up? You see, until 1918, Germany was called the German Empire. Why? This is because prior to 1815, there existed the most needless and pointless entity in the whole of European history. This was called the Holy Roman Empire, or the HRE. Or as Voltaire aptly put it, the body which was called and which still calls itself the Holy Roman Empire was in no way holy nor Roman nor an empire. Napoleon had unintentionally dismantled the HRE by trying to crown himself as emperor. When Napoleon was finally defeated, the German states were now somewhat united. Either they were previously somewhat large, like Bavaria and Württemberg, or they united to form the North German Confederacy. The larger states were allied to Napoleon, so didn't initially join the North German Confederacy, but later joined to form the German Confederation. This happened in 1866, and all German states other than Austria formally joined Prussia to form the German Empire in 1871. Anyway, back to the 1950s. Under Lenin and Stalin, the USSR had become a repressive police state where everything you said would most likely have been reported to the NKVD. After Stalin died, the leaders of the USSR changed a few laws. In the 1950s and 60s, the USSR had competed against the US in what is called the Cold War. However, by the 1970s and 80s, they were lagging behind. Why am I talking about the USSR, you ask? This is because the military alliance of the USSR, the Warsaw Pact, had a provision that stated that member states had to stay communist and that the USSR would station its military to ensure that. This meant that all anti communist riots and all policies that went against the USSR would be put down by the USSR. But what would happen if the USSR did not help the states? In 1985, a new leader was elected in the USSR. His name is Mikhail Gorbachev. Mikhail wanted to get the USSR back on track. So what did he do? He reverted the repressive laws once again and even gave the people the right to free speech. In the 1950s, East Germans started emigrating to the West. Now, they couldn't go through the actual border. However, there existed the West German exclave of West Berlin. These East Germans would go to West Berlin under the guise of employment and then would fly from there to the rest of West Germany, where they would be treated as full citizens of West Germany. To combat this, East Germany had to do something, and they did what all world leaders love to do. They built a wall, specifically the Berlin Wall. This made it much harder for the East Germans to leave East Germany, but it also cut off West Berlin ideologically from the rest of the West. After Hungary opened its borders to the West, the East Germans would then use Hungary to go from Hungary to Austria to West Germany, where they would be considered full German citizens. Seeing this, the East German government closed its borders to all neighboring countries. The people obviously went on strike. In Poland and Hungary, after finding out that the USSR wasn't sending their troops, the governments relented and had free elections with parties of other ideologies. Seeing this, the government convened and relented on November 9, 1989. They were going to open the borders to West Germany. However, this was supposed to take a few months, and to obtain permission would take longer. That evening, a press conference was held. This is when the greatest plot twist in contemporary history happened. The press secretary announcing the new legislation made a huge mistake. Instead of announcing that it would take a few months, he said that the border would be opened immediately. Lots of people saw this and flocked to the Berlin Wall. The guards waited but didn't know what to do, so they opened the gates. But there were a lot of people. To get to the west faster, they started breaking parts of the wall. And so, the symbol of the Cold War, the Berlin Wall, had finally fallen. People all over Germany, whether in the east or the west, celebrated the fall of the Berlin Wall. Upon hearing the news, the West German parliament stood up and sang their national anthem. However, one person was missing from these celebrations on November 9th. The West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl was in Poland at the time, celebrating with their newly elected non-communist government. Once he heard the news, he immediately left for Germany and started crafting a plan for reunification. Just because the wall had fallen did not mean that Germany was united. This was because there were still the allies in the USSR who had their troops on German soil and they had reserved rights. This reserved rights meant that the UK, France, USA and USSR all had to allow German reunification for it to happen, and they did not want this. They also had to convince the East Germans that they wanted to join the West. This was easy, as joining the West was seen as escaping from poverty. So that's one down. Next, he went to France. France was led by François Mitterrand. Germany had always been superior to France, and historically they had always been enemies. Also, Germany was founded on the defeat of France. Kohl really wanted reunification, and Mitterrand knew this. Mitterrand had also realized that by having a united Germany as an ally along with the rest of Europe, France would be much stronger. So, he asked for a bigger role for the EU. The UK, led by Margaret Thatcher, did not want this. She believed that a united Germany would cause another world war, dragging Britain into it. However, by this time, the UK was not the superpower it once was, and Kohl believed that if he got the support of the other powers, Britain would back down. Kohl had always been a good friend of Ronald Reagan and a close ally of the USA. Bush also realized that this would take land away from the USSR and let the NATO station bases and troops closer to the Russian heartland. For the same reasons the USA wanted German reunification, the USSR did not want German reunification. But by this time, the USSR had been pushing through some reforms and the rest of the communist world was revolting. East Germany was also in a constant need of money. So Gorbachev thought, what if he could sell East Germany to the West? He would lose this large expense, gain money, and a powerful ally in the process. But he had a few conditions. There were to be no NATO bases in East Germany, and the USSR pulling troops back wasn't to be shown as a retreat. NATO agreed, and Kohl sent a delegation to Moscow to talk about Germany giving loans to the USSR in exchange for German reunification. The USSR agreed, and the UK would bow out. And so Germany was united. But Kohl also wanted the German territories taken by the USSR and Poland after World War II. But the four powers said it was either East Germany or none at all. So Kohl relented, and the newly formed Germany would relinquish its claims to these territories. Now that I've finished talking about the reunification of Germany, why did I talk about it in the first place? Well, let's just speculate of what could happen in the future. Of course, it could have happened in the past as well, as Pakistan and Bangladesh were supposed to be autonomous territories of India, but our dear Nehru had to screw everything up. But for all intents and purposes, Germany was not supposed to unite, but it did. Though we've had a tumultuous past, maybe in the future we could see an India that encompasses the territories of the British Raj under a better government than the past. Thanks for watching and stay safe.